In this week's video, we set up the Fluval Flora. It did not go as planned, but I love it anyway. It's coming up right after this. Hey YouTube, this is Pecktec, and today, yes, as I said earlier, we're going to go through the setup. Now, I had some problems, and not a few of those were me not reading, or maybe ignoring instructions. I wanted this cabinet to work so bad, and what I did was cut a hole in it. I'm not going to show you that hole on this channel. It was not professionally done or well done at all. I'm embarrassed by the hole I cut in the bottom of this thing. And it was just, I just did it to do it. So eventually when spills happen, and it turned out they happened a lot at the beginning of this, they go directly to the tile and it doesn't get on wood necessarily. I mean, there's still wood around obviously, but there's a big hole for water to go down. And water on tile is super easy to deal with. So what I'm tiptoeing around is that I forgot to put the freaking gasket on the canister filter. I've set up a lot of canister filters, and I got a little bit ahead of myself, and I set it up, and I could have sworn that I pulled it out on the video and put it on, but I guess I didn't. I think because the thing was encased in like a grease, so I didn't want to break the seal, but I'd forgotten to pull it out when I pulled out the canister filter to show it in the last video. So it didn't even trigger in my mind that I needed to do that. Now, I thought it felt a little loose. So I wanted to test the waters, as they say. And when I went to fill it, I had my hand right there on the little release valve. And it goes down into the canister. Just like, I pull that thing up once, and it's like, it's sucking the water in. That's great. But it gets up to about the handles and starts just pouring out the side. And it was a bad thing. I don't know if I was filming. In fact, I doubt that I was filming at the time. It was a really kind of messy, horrible experience, because even my hand right there, I stopped it, and there's still like it was at least a 3-toweler. So yeah, that wasn't fun. So I went and I found the gasket. I put it on, and of course it worked after that. But the other thing is, and I noticed this when I went to seal it, I'd kind of taken the hose and I kind of resized it. I put an adapter on, and I kind of sized it up one to fit better in the canister filter. The thing is, there were too many places for compromise, and in 2 different places I started seeing leaks, and it wasn't going to work. And a bunch of you gave me the advice to boil a hose to kind of help it get resized. So I put on the kettle, I boiled the end of my hoses, and I just kind of worked it onto the thing. It's nice and tight on there. I think it's going to be fine. As far as the CO2 goes from the last video too, I mean, those things are hidden. I think I was just kind of going for speed. I knew about the water thing, and I probably should have done that. In fact, making a cup of tea or just a cup of hot water from the tea kettle made it short work of that hose. So thanks for that tip. So that was problem number 1. Problem number 2 was post setup, and I think it was because of this new wood that I purchased. And then a lot of the materials that I used, they interacted with the water in a really strange way. And I ended up with this like new tank syndrome, but kind of to a really huge degree. Or maybe it was actually probably a combination of things. Now, I expected a lot of tannins because I included a lot of botanicals in this setup. But I was surprised at how foggy it was also. It wasn't just dark, it was dark and foggy. It really bothered me, and and of course it stayed and it just kind of wouldn't go away. So this go round, I didn't have a tremendous amount of plants to throw in, and I decided it would be great to experiment with some botanicals, especially in that kind of short term. I have some plants that I think propagate really quickly, so with those I don't tend to put in I don't tend to plant it full. Like, I don't plant it to be finished when I do it. I usually I leave a little bit of room for stuff to kind of grow in. And part of that's just not having a ton of plants. But really I want it to be something that grew in and be more true to what you'd really see in real life. So was it tiger wood? Was it botanicals that caused it to be the super fog? I'm not sure. I know most of what I did to set this up, I've done a lot. Like, I've done it a whole bunch of times. I've never had the same issue. The 2 wild factors where I used a lot more botanicals than I usually do, maybe 2 or 3 times more. And I did not boil them nearly as long as I normally would either. And I had this wood that I could not boil in the middle. I did boil the edges of it, the corners, mostly to help it sink. It looks a lot like spider wood, and I expected it to kind of behave that way. I have to say it's a bit darker, but I think it could be easily mistaken for spiderwood. I'm not entirely sure that it's not some type of azalea, because that's what spiderwood is. It's a type of azalea. But it's really neat looking, and it kind of fit the purpose. Now, I'm kind of getting tired of making trees out of things. I wasn't really going for a tree per se, but I definitely used all the nooks and crannies to put a bunch of Anubis clippings that I have from around different tanks. So let's look at the setup really quick, and I'll finish it out and kind of show you more what it looks like now, what I'm planning to do.
So this material is sort of it's a padded material that they sell in a big roll. You can get it at a hardware store. A lot of times people use it for silverware or tools just to kind of pad it a little bit. This didn't come with a pad, so I decided just to make my own. I really prefer it with a pad underneath. The next thing I'm using here is called aragonite. It's a crushed coral. I find that it kind of helps buffer the water a little bit, kind of keeps it a little bit more consistent. It also gives me a kind of a crunchy substrate for things to grow in. The next thing I'm adding here is a powder. It's basically a red clay powder. I got it in my aquarium box, and I'm experimenting with this. It did really well in the flex to help my red colors out in my plants. Adds a little bit of iron. This next thing I'm using here is fluorite. It does something similar, and again, it's a real crunchy substrate. The nutrients in this substrate last forever, and it's kind of at the core of a lot of my projects. I brushed it up to the middle so you didn't kind of see it to the edges, and it kind of gives it a natural incline too. So the next thing I added was stratum, and stratum is it's a soil-based substrate that Fluval makes. I've used stratum a number of times. It was one of my first soil-based substrates, and I really enjoy it. I find it works in a really similar way than a lot of them. I guess my only complaint with all the soil-based substrates is that it's a little hard to plant in. It's a little loose, and it's kind of hard to get the plants in there. Having that crunchy center will help a little bit with that, though. So for most of the plants in this tank, I pulled them from other tanks. And this is something I normally do. I take trimmings and I add them in. I was fortunate when I did the flex to have a whole lot to work with. I basically had the entire 55-gallon tank that I took down to work with, and it was really full right from the get-go. That won't be the case with this one. We're going to let it grow in. I did have some plants that are kind of growing in ways I didn't want to. I wanted to kind of clear out some swimming space in the front of the flex, so I had all this area to kind of pull these plants out. The first thing I grabbed there was Vesuvius sword. The other plant that I'm grabbing out here is a type of narrowleaf Luigia. I'll try to look that up for you guys. I love this plant. It's really vibrant red and stuff, and it's really easy to propagate. I can split it in half and then just kind of double what I've got. Also, because this tank is so heavily planted, hidden in the back here, I've got all kinds of Anubias growing. It's all Anubias nana of different, from different tanks. I've had this plant going for a long, long time, propagated it many, many times. And it's fun. I just had little secret stashes of Anubias all over. I grabbed a bunch from this tank, and I got some from the other tanks as well. I grabbed a lot of plants out of the Fluval Flex, but it was none the worse for wear. It still looks completely full. It's great. The next plant I got is it can be kind of a nuisance plant. It's it's a type of sword plant, and it grows really fast. It seems to do really well, and I'm going to put this in opposite the other sword plants. And I basically am just pulling out trimmings that have gone too far in other tanks and adding it in here. For this one on the hardscape, I did a combination of dragonstone and the tigerwood. And what you're seeing here is like nothing like what it ended up being. The big rock on the left just was like too much, and I ended up swapping it out later. But after I added some rocks to kind of get my initial hardscape started, I decided to soak the substrate a little bit with this sprayer. That just kind of helps the plant stick. As I said, it can be kind of difficult because that substrate moves around. I put the Vesuvius sword because it gets kind of full. I put it in the back to kind of help disguise the heater. Of course, it won't be doing that for a long time. I added the other sword on the opposite side to kind of see which one grows, and the Luigia there in the middle. A lot of the Nubius clippings, I took the best parts of it, and I added it to the top of this tiger wood, because it's got all these neat little branches that seem perfect to kind of cradle those little rhizomes of Anubias. I'm thinking now that this is probably adding a little too much shade, and I'm not sure I'm going to keep this setup. In fact, I'm really tempted to pull that whole piece of wood out and do something else with it later. Maybe add that whole thing as a Anubias and all to another tank in the future. I'm not sure about that yet. I went ahead and put the water in. I dribbled it in really, really slow, but you already know the end result of that, which was a big foggy mess for almost 2 weeks.
So a few of the plans from the last video seem to work really well. The CO2 is working as expected. The water did siphon into, I let the CO2 go for a little bit, let it bubble for a little bit, and I turned it all the way off and kind of waited overnight, and it siphoned down into the little bubble checker. So I didn't really have to fill it with water, and I guess I don't have to worry about water getting in there, which is cool in two ways. One, I don't have to kind of try to fill it with water before I put it on. And two, in theory, it'll never run out of water because it's always going to be there to get siphoned in. Those drop checker fluids and things that people mentioned are great ideas, by the way. I definitely will probably use that on the other CO2 set that I've got on the 20 gallon. I will say that I find that little canister to be really difficult to control. Like it's really hard to open it, and the best I did was I got it to go into kind of a slow, like one bubble every 3 or 4 seconds. I kind of got it to get really super slow like that and just stay on all the time. I've got a little indicator in there, just kind of give me a rough idea of where it's at, and apparently that's not very strong. There are a number of comments directed towards the CO2 regulator and the size of the tanks in general. And I have to say, yes, you're right. The difference between like a really big tank and a regular regulator and stuff, it's a huge difference. Can you do stuff with this? You can. If you want to keep it real consistent, or you're going to really keep those bubbles going, it's a good experimental device to just kind of try it and see if you can tell a difference for a month. Odds are that canister, if you were like going to do it for any length of time during the day, odds are that canister probably would not last you very long, maybe not even a month. I'm not certain. I've got it running on a constant bubble, just like I said, very slow bubble up, and you can't see very much. What's interesting too is the glass diffuser that I've got also is kind of a bubble counter, as you can see the bubbles actually come up, then they hit the white part and just kind of explode into even smaller bubbles. But the problems I've had, I didn't want to exacerbate things by, running too much CO2 into this while it's trying to adjust. And it's been more about, can I get something usable out of that regulator? So if I have to offer a critique on that particular part of the Flora setup, I'd say it'd be neat if it had a regulator with at least a solenoid on it. That way you could put it on a timer and really use CO2 the way you should, in a consistent way. And again, about consistency, that regulator would have to be a little bit like it. What I noticed, and this is probably more true as the canister's really new, but like you move it just a little bit and you're like way too many bubbles. Then you pull it down and you feel like it's closed almost, and sometimes it is closed. You watch the bubbles kind of get normal, then you go back and check it, and you're like, okay, I think I've got it, and then you go back and check it later and you've turned it off. It was just too tight, and eventually, ran out of pressure and turned off. So you kind of adjust it again, and you got way too many bubbles, and then you go back, and you can eventually get it. If you it's a real light touch though. You can eventually get it somewhere it's usable, but it's not convenient. It's a fun experiment, and it's a neat part of the tank, kind of a gimmicky part. CO2 is definitely a great way to enhance any plant tank, just about. It does great work. You don't have to use it though. It's not essential. And I think as a consumer, I would have rather had you know, a big bag of stratum maybe than the CO2. But I bet the weight difference between those two things really probably precluded that. Well, the stratum's not super heavy, but it's definitely going to be heavier than a little CO2 kit. The light works great. Of course, the light's not new news to me. I've had them for a long time, and I love the look of this tank. I love working in that kind of that cube shape. I like the white background quite a bit more than I thought I would, and it is translucent, so you can shine a colored light behind it, kind of change it up a little bit if you want to be real jazzy. You can do some neat natural looking effects, and then I bet you could add some opaque cutting clippings or something to the back of that, shine a light through it, and have like a little sunset over the mountains or something like that. There's all kinds of creative stuff to do with that, and I will experiment with that as time goes on. Of course, if you're buying this out of the kit and you haven't seen the last video, it comes with an Aqua Clear 20. I chose to upgrade that to a Fluval 107 canister. And then I upgrade again by taking the canister filter inlet and outlet and using the glass versions of those, which has been pretty cool. I am so excited to have this aquarium in my house. I've wanted this aquarium since I first saw it at the show a while back. The aquascape you see behind me actually is not the finished aquascape, as I'm going to go one more time. I have those botanicals literally boiling over here on the other side of the room one more time before I put them back in for some final shots. I came home today. It's been getting clearer and clearer the past couple of days, and I came in today and I was like, you know what, that looks good enough to show. I know a couple of times before, like I've finished the setup video and the tank's still cloudy and it looks, you know, new. And this isn't a whole lot better than that, but it's not too bad for 2 weeks. So I just wanted to wait and give it, like, you know, its best shot at looking pretty good. I hope the plant's growing well. I think they will. And I'm excited to kind of see what happens inside of here. Hopefully it'll be all good things and not so many nightmares. I do think my further water changes are now going to be from the 210, just like I did with the other tank. I'll give bacteria kind of something to eat. Maybe I'll throw a snail in here or something if the water seems okay. But I guess that's all I have for you today. I might do another aqua shopper next week, and but it's going to be more fish oriented. So I'm going to show you fishes that I've purchased recently. So most likely, that's what you'll be watching next week. Until then, follow your bliss, keep a clean tank, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye. So let's get up to, so let me get you up to speed on the setup, and so let me show you what I did with the setup. So let's look at the setup really quick. Yay, I get to clean a tube! Yeah, so you can do some kind of neat, natural looking effects with the natural things. I boiled those, but with the problems I've had, I didn't really want to exacerbate.